What is the difference between Eastern meditation and esoterica and Western meditation and esoterica? Well, first off, with Eastern meditation, it really depends upon what you're talking about. But generally speaking, what Eastern meditation and esoterica tends to highlight the path of enlightenment. This is taking these more physical energies and transforming them into more subtle ones in an attempt to reach non-dual light, nirvana, the true Buddha, the true Tao, these kinds of states. Okay, that's pretty easy to understand. Now, with Western meditation and esoterica, you have a twofold path. One is the path of enlightenment. This is very clear if you really deep dove the Western meditative techniques. Many people tend to ignore that because of the second thing I'm getting to, in that Western meditation and esoterica equally values the path of manifestation or the path of return. And again, there are exceptions to this. For example, groups like the Essenes in Western meditation considered the physical body and physical reality to be corrupt and basically evil. Just as in Eastern meditation practices, you have things like Shingon Buddhism, what used to be Nijun, or the Taoist faith that invented writing, warfare, medicine, and things like this, people who were clearly interested in the physical world. But generally speaking, very broad-based. The Eastern practices, or the ones out of Asia, or what used to be called the Orient, are largely concerned with enlightenment at the expense of physical manifestation or doing things with it. On the other hand, again, with the Western traditions, you have an equal focus on the enlightenment path and the path of manifestation, or simply put, getting things done. Now, again, there are differences depending upon which particular group of people you're talking about, but let's get into what some of this means. What is the path of enlightenment per se? Well, the path of enlightenment is just that. It's when a light is generated in your head that's permanent and stable, and your mind is projected into a realm beyond the color, beyond sensation, beyond emotion, beyond all of these things. And ultimately, that state can only be defined in the negative. This is important to keep in mind because the sages have been arguing over what exactly this means for thousands and thousands of years before the written word even existed. The only thing that everybody can agree on is that whatever that state is very important, and for the most part can only be defined in a negative sense. It is not this, it is not that. Now, the path of manifestation is just that. It is taking these more subtle energies, bringing them down into the physical to create things. Now, for the most part, most people can only manifest to the level of the energetic, or what some would call the astral, to any meaningful degree. But this is important. If you want to increase your run times, if you want to do hands-on healing, you want to charge sacred foods, you want to change yourself, you want to work with other people, you want to influence other people, well, the energetic is a very, very good way to do that. The bottleneck seems to come when you bridge from the energetic into the physical. At this point, you need something more physical to work with. This is where things like alchemy and its follow-on known as chemistry come into play. Now, these differences in focuses have a profound effect upon the societies in question, sometimes to the point of idiocy. So, when you're talking about societies that are overly concerned with enlightenment, they don't tend to get much done on a physical basis and can in turn be very poor. Why? Their efforts as a culture are devoted towards spiritual manifestation, not towards physical manifestation. So they don't tend to do things like invent the internet or invent steel or these other things. On the other hand, if you were dealing with a society that's largely concerned with the path of manifestation, it's very easy to forget about the path of enlightenment. So much so that you get things like materialism, or this belief that there is no life after the current one we're in, there is no such thing as subtle energy. So a good example of that is a classical Western person born in the 20th century typically only believed in 3 levels of reality: the physical, the mental, and if they were religious, non-dual light or God. Well, the problem with that is by actively ignoring the energetic and actively ignoring the Akashic, it makes it very difficult to bridge from one state of reality to another, which is where you get a whole bunch of nonsense about how, oh, if I can't measure it, it doesn't exist, and all these other kinds of problems you run into with pure materialists. The running joke of it is most pure materialists have very little faith, which means lacking faith, they can't generate Akasha, and lacking Akasha, they can't even bridge to non-dual light. In many ways, it's a form of spiritual castration that's, quite frankly, rather pathetic at the end of the day. So again, depending upon how a society is structured, it's going to directly impact how they interact with reality. Because here's the thing. Reality doesn't care about your beliefs. Reality is going to do whatever the hell reality is going to do, and it's going to work the way it works. But your beliefs directly impact how you perceive and how you can engage with reality. So if you have a true materialist, they're generally atheist as well, because they're not going to believe in divinity, God, non-dual light, nirvana, the true Tao, etc. They're really hamstrung. I mean, reaching over the void or Akasha is going to be difficult because they lack the faith that underpins Akasha, and in turn, they're not going to be able to generate the Akasha that they need to generate non-dual light. Now, there are some workarounds with this involving things like single-pointed focus exercises and a few other things that allow you to generate very small amounts of Akasha. But there's a catch. Once they generate that little bit of Akasha, things are going to start happening that violate their belief system. So at a certain point, they're going to have to choose between being a devout materialist and becoming something else. And that's a pretty radical change for someone who's really, truly invested in that viewpoint. It's extremely painful, and quite frankly, they usually go a little crazy for a little while. It's not the end of the world, but this is where you see a lot of people quit the meditative process because it's just too traumatic for them. They literally have to change their whole life. Now, on the flip side, okay, you have people who are devoted to spiritualism or the path of enlightenment, for lack of a better word, at the expense of the physical. When you're younger, you can generally get away with these things. The body's pretty robust, so if you're following a goofy diet, or you're not getting adequate sleep, or you're otherwise living rough, it's not such a big deal. The trouble comes when you get older and you really start to suffer because you've ignored your physical needs for 50 years. I mean, listen, it's a running joke in finance circles, but money does not guarantee happiness, but poverty pretty much guarantees misery. How much do you need? How much do you have? How much do you want? How does that work? So again, this isn't an indictment of one society or another, but it's important to understand that depending upon your doctrinal basis for how you engage reality, this is going to largely determine what you can perceive. And in the meditative business, we're largely about empowerment. I want people to have both. That's the healthy way of doing things because we have a physical body, we live in a physical world, and if you don't pay attention to those needs, you're going to suffer. But likewise, if you only pay attention to the physical body in the physical world, everybody knows people who do that, and they're completely miserable. And so that's one of the interesting things about engaging in both the path of enlightenment and the path of return. So these are things that I'd like you to keep in mind and think about as you go through your own day and your own practice. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well. And if you like the topic of today's discussion, please hit the like button down below, consider subscribing, and come over to 60skills.com or the Facebook page 60 Skills and see what we're up to. Otherwise, have a great day.